So a lot of the stuff that I cover on my channel is mostly related to current events, whether it's Jessica Yaniv or any of the multitudes of insanity that comes out of the trans community. But I don't really focus too much on more helping people, and I realise that I have quite a big platform now, and really I should be looking at giving assistance as and when I can. Now, I know that a lot of us are dealing with the fallout of the coronavirus pandemic, which has been wonderfully gifted to us by the Chinese Communist Party. I'm sure by mentioning that I'm going to get a load of woo-mow in my comments, but I'm willing to just deal with that. So rather than focus on a lot of the negativity that's been going on, let's try and do something positive. And some of the best kind of advice I can really give is something which I've clearly gone through, and what I think a lot of my viewers are either going through themselves or might be considering going through. And that is transitioning. If you are a trans woman, specifically, this video is about trans women, you might not necessarily know where to start. A lot of the sources out there seem to be very leaning towards the more social justice-y, trans activist-y looking at all women, all trans women are, whoever they say they are, they're clearly a woman, and that's a woman's body, and you don't really need to worry about anything to do with transitioning, just say you're a woman and that's that. And that's not really helpful. That's not going to result in a successful transition. So I want to kind of give people a bit of a timeline as to what you should really be expecting, what you should be doing if you want your transition to be as good as possible. Now, this does also involve being a little bit blunt. So you decided to transition, you probably have you probably have this image in your head that, you know, you're going to be this really cute looking trans woman. Like effectively you're going to be this seal. Like, look at this seal. Isn't this seal adorable? You're so cute. But the truth is, you're probably not looking like this seal right now, are you? You're probably more like this big bull seal barging your way into women's bathrooms saying, "This is a woman's body." Now, you might never reach the cute seal phase. In fact, very few of us turn out to look like Blair White. And I want to make it very clear that when I'm talking about transition, I don't mean that you're going to be this stunning looking trans woman. That's not what a transition really is. If you notice in the real world, for example, not all women look like supermodels, do they? So, you know, you've got to take that into consideration. Now, my friend Miss London has also given out some advice on what to do to transition, and that will be coming up later in the video. So don't take all of this from me, listen to her as well. So with that being said, I want to start off by talking about the things that you should really be doing right as soon as you've decided you want to transition. So really, one of the main things I've talked about when it comes to being a transsexual is that it is all to do with a medical condition known as gender dysphoria. And that's the first thing that really needs to be treated. So I point this out because this is going to sound very obvious to a lot of people, but you'd be surprised with the amount of people who completely forget or ignore to do this. But take the medical pathway as soon as possible. If you think you have gender dysphoria, get this checked out by a medical professional. So this could involve, in the UK, for example, going to your GP, mentioning to them about what you're going through, and then they can put the referral into a gender identity clinic. Now, I know you're going to start telling me, but Rose, the queues for this are outrageous. You could be waiting years for an appointment. And so that's why I would like to really strongly suggest that you have a look at the private route. Now, I will be completely honest and say that wasn't something which I did when I was transitioning. I went through the NHS and I did wait a long time. It was about 6 months from when I'd seen several professionals before they would actually put in the referral to the GIC. But nowadays, you just seem to be able to go straight to the GIC from your GP. And I think that might be one of the reasons why the system is fairly clogged at the moment, with a lot of people, a lot of MBs I should add, taking up a lot of space. So look at going private. Now, just to make it clear, this isn't you paying for people to give you a diagnosis. Far from it. I've actually heard of examples of people who say that they are trans women going to these private appointments, and the medical professional that they've seen tells them that they don't have gender dysphoria. Now, that cues a lot of screeching on social media and a lot of accusations of how dare they be transphobic, but you're taking their advice because this is the reason why you're going through all this in the first place, right? I mean, you want to be sure before you go down that route of transitioning, and especially when you start taking the medication, it's best to be as sure as you possibly can be that it is going to be right. Now, it might be a while before you end up getting on hormones, so you're going to need to start doing something which was referred to back in my day as a real life experience. And this is especially important if you're saying that you can't afford to go through the private route because you don't have a job. And it's really important to get into the real world whilst you're transitioning, and to actually look at getting employment is one of the main things that they would be looking for in a real life test, to be sure that you are actually fully comfortable and fully functional as a member of society. Now, don't listen to the multiple activists who will tell you that, discrimination is rife. At least in the UK, I cannot comment on the United States or anywhere else in the world. There are specific laws to protect trans people in the workplace. So you being trans should not be a factor in whether or not you're going to get a job. Now, I should point out that at the start of my transition, I was able to get 2 jobs before I was referred hormones for the first time. And that was in a time when the rules kind of weren't as well known, and I was able to do it. If I was able to do it, I think a lot of you can as well. So I don't want to be hearing anyone saying, oh, but it's too hard. Like, you can do it. Granted, whilst I'm recording this, we don't know what the state of the economy is going to be post-coronavirus, but for the sake of argument, let's assume that it's similar to the recession in 2008. There will still be jobs, there are still things that you can apply for. And speaking of the real life experience, one of the really important things about this is just going on about your daily life. Yes, you may be expected to present female whilst not taking any kind of hormones. You're effectively going into this in hard mode, but that's perfectly fine because this really kind of builds a bit more character within you. Now, you're going to be clocked during this time. You're going to have people realizing that you're actually male, and that is going to suck. It's going to suck so much, especially when you might have a good streak of people referring to you with the right pronouns, only for someone at some point to simply throw that back in your face and say that's a man. That is going to be painful, but you'll need to push through with it. Expect it to happen. Expect it to happen multiple times. But the more confidence that you build during this period, when you finally get on them sweet, sweet hormones, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable with yourself. You need to start really with the difficult bit, and eventually things do get a lot easier. So I've talked about the importance of going through that medical pathway, and specifically about being able to live your life through your job, but also it's important to make sure you're socializing properly as well. And another really important thing is to not focus on the queer community, as it were, to kind of give you the support that you think that you need, or more specifically, to have that as your entire social circle. So when I first came out as being trans, the world was a different place, or at least the world of trans politics was a different place. Instead of all these hyper woke queer activists, instead you'd get fairly cringy 40, 50-year-olds who would wear frocks and give themselves weird names and always talk about baking cakes and doing all these stereotypical 1950s housewives activities, and that was a little bit weird. Frankly, if you look for your entire social circle to be coming out of the trans community, you're not going to get a rounded experience of what it's like when you transition to be a woman. These are not biological women. They don't have the same kind of knowledge, and what will end up happening is you'll get into a hug space, an echo chamber, where the second you step out of it, you will find it incredibly hard because people aren't always going to refer to you in the way that you want. And so try and have a look at expanding your friendship group. See if do you have friends who are women? Like, maybe hang out with them more. Whilst there are a lot of rad femmes out there who would probably be quite hostile to the idea of a trans woman socialising with women, because, trans women aren't real women and all of that, I found that most support for whilst I was transitioning came from my female friends. And I'm sure that a lot of you will find that as well. That's not to say that they're just going to instantly accept you as being a woman or anything like that. Far from it. But try and be realistic with this. And you're not going to get a full rounded experience of what it's like to be a woman if you're not actually hanging out with women, if that makes sense. But even more so, just make sure that you're doing things that you want to do and just kind of living your life as normally as you can. Don't get sucked into the vortex of intersectional politics that is ultimately going to hijack your mind and make you try and think a certain way, because it will only come and spit you out if you try and break away from them. Do you have hobbies? Well, hang out with people who have hobbies. I shouldn't really be explaining to people how to make friends, but sometimes you do kind of need to do that to make it clear how important all of this stuff is whilst you're doing your real life experience. But another thing to really kind of take into account whilst you're doing your real life experience, so to speak, is to actually dress like a normal person. This sounds really, really patronizing, but you will often see a lot of people in the early days of their transition looking a little bit janky, wearing clothes that nobody else would really wear, looking pretty rough. Now, I always try and give, a bit of give with people in this position, because this is what a lot of us go through. But it doesn't help if you associate with just people who are going to hug you and say that you look pretty and beautiful no matter what. You do need a little bit of criticism there. And especially if you're wearing stuff that is really, really, really stupid, because a lot of people wear things that are really stupid during their transitions. So why not just start somewhere simple, like wearing jeans and a t-shirt? Lots of women wear jeans and a t-shirt. That's cool. You can do that. Being a woman doesn't mean wearing a dress. It doesn't mean being hyper femme or all these other queer buzzwords. It just means being a woman. Women wear jeans and t-shirts. Unless you really think that women are stuck in the 1950s. So you've taken all of these various steps, and now you're at the point where you've been on your hormones. So what else really is there to do? Well, really, the important thing is to have some sort of support whilst you're going through, especially the medical side of things. By that, I don't necessarily mean get yourself a nice little group of trans people to talk to, or one of these weird trans support groups, but maybe some sort of psychiatric help. And I should make it clear, I'm not saying this because going through a transition, you're already damaged or anything like that. What I mean is going through a transition is a huge, huge decision. It's not something that should be taken lightly. And admittedly, when I was transitioning, I didn't quite have the kind of support that I really would have needed. So it'd be worth it to have someone that you can check up with, someone who is there for you, that you can talk to about all the kind of anxieties that you're having, the multiple stresses in your life, because eventually all of this stuff might really come down on you in the future. Make sure you're not going through that alone and you have that relevant help in place. So let's say you've now done everything that I've said so far, that you're going through the awkward phase, but you're starting to dress normally. You've got yourself fully into society. You have a decent group of friends, and you're also on the medical pathway. But there seems to be one last thing that a lot of people forget about, and I really shouldn't have to point this out, but I have to point this out, especially when you do a channel like mine, where you're often hearing the voices of trans people, and that's voice work. Now, disclaimer, there's going to be somebody in the comments saying that I sound like a man, and whatever, my voice was much, much worse years ago. I've had to work to get myself to sound like this, and when I'm at work, people don't know that I'm trans, really, so, I'm just going to take that. But it's important to do so because you can look absolutely amazing. You can hit every other thing, but your voice is probably the biggest giveaway that you're actually a tranner. it's so important to take those steps, and you can get voice therapy, you can get vocal coaching, and you can do that through the NHS. You can go to private appointments, so that would probably be a little bit easier. But that is something which is so crucial, and so many people leave that off. Like, what is, like, ultimately when you're transitioning, the aim at the end shouldn't really be that, you know, people could still know that you're trans. You want to be able to live your life normally and not have people to always constantly be questioning your gender. I mean, that causes anxiety. And admittedly, there's going to be people where that will always be the case, where there's always going to be someone who might be able to tell, but you want to kind of minimize that as much as you can. So work on your voice. So I've pretty much put out all of my pointers, and now I'm just going to hand it over to my good friend Miss London, who has a couple of things to say herself.
I'm London. If you hear something downstairs, it's my parents watching the Democrats eat each other alive. Just what we want. Cannibalism. It solves both world hunger and overpopulation. The Democrats are doing something right by this. Sorry. What am I doing again? The lovely, iconic, amazing, show-stopping, never the same, totally unique, unafraid to reference.
Completely not ever been done before, unafraid to reference or not reference, put it in a blender, shit on it, vomit on it, eat it, give birth to it.
Rose of Dawn DM'd me and was like, yo, name some things that are the most important things to take into consideration while transitioning. And because I'm doing charity work for you poor motherfuckers, so some important things to note while transitioning. Now you, a young, old, middle-aged, so one big thing is self-evaluation, and this is probably going to change over time, and it changes for a lot of people, but self-evaluation is very important while transitioning, I believe. The specific things you want to self-evaluate is, can you see you being presented and being, you know, perceived as a woman or man? The opposite, that's what we're going for. Gender for the rest of your life long. Can you imagine getting married as a man or woman? Can you imagine you having kids or just growing old as the opposite gender, basically? Know your area and be self-aware in general. Be self-aware of how you look. Know what's around you, know who's around you, know everything like that. That stuff is very, very important. Like when I was first transitioning, my mom would literally call like Victoria's Secret, every store that I was going into first to make sure that they were trans friendly before anything, like before I would even go out. And I'm not saying do that, but I'm saying, you know, definitely take in consideration the areas you're at, because you do want to be safe, and being safe and knowing your surroundings is a must, and it's very, very, very important. Another thing is surgery will not cure your depression and won't solve your life problems. Your life problems will still be there, your depression will still be there. While it might be alleviated to a point, while it might solve some things, obviously, because that's why we get it, to solve things, it's not going to solve everything, and there's still life after surgery. Life doesn't actually alter as much as you would think it would. For some people it might, but for most, you know, it's life, but it's life after surgery. It's not a whole new life. This is the life that happens to happen after surgery. You might pass more, and that's fantastic, wonderful, beautiful, we live for it, but life still goes on. We'll go through bumps in the road. Surgery won't solve everything, and that's kind of the mindset that you also want to be in. Like, it just goes back to regular shit after this, back to the old grind. Let's do this, housewives. It's best to take that in consideration, because post-surgery depression is a thing. Another thing, and it has to do with surgery, post-surgery depression happens for a lot of people, and it happens for most people, in fact, or most people that I know after surgery get post-surgery depression. I recently read an article, and it was a horribly sad article about a trans man that killed himself because he got surgery and was very, very sad afterwards. A lot of external things were happening, like problems with his relationships, financial problems, but a big thing he wasn't ready for was post-surgery depression, and his post-surgery depression to be specific, being isolated in a room for a bit. And what I will say, after surgery of any sort, get yourself prepared. Like, get yourself prepared. If you have photos to edit, if you have games to play, if you have magazines to read, if you have books to read, you know, just keep yourself occupied and busy. In fact, what I did before I got surgery was turn my whole room around. Like, I got everything ready, and I'm not a big fan of change at all, but like I knew just being stuck looking at the same thing in my room would probably depress me. So I was like, okay, let's change the light colors here. Let's put this picture here, just so it's not like, and I won't be looking at the same fucking thing going slowly insane. So whatever you need to do to make yourself happy without you actually getting up very much, obviously get up, because that'll reduce the chances of blood clots, but don't overwork yourself, obviously. I sound like such a fucking mother. Don't overwork yourself, sweetie. But for real, like, keep yourself busy, keep yourself occupied without being so physical. Other than that, that's really all I can think of. I do not recommend inhaling your spit. Thank you, Rose of Dawn, you fucking goddess, for having me on your channel. I want to thank the foreign press. I want to thank my family. I want to thank my mom, my dad, Ella Grant. I want to thank everybody for this lovely opportunity. Hold on, let me Laura Leach this and get my fake tears. One moment, please. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank Miss London for her contribution, and I'm sure you agree that it's pretty entertaining. Thank you all for watching. I want to apologise that there's been a lack of content over the last couple of weeks. If you want me to be completely honest, the reason for that, as I've mentioned in the past, I have been dealing with like quite a severe anxiety disorder, and being in a global pandemic hasn't really helped, but I feel like I'm starting to kind of get over that now. I'm going to be working from home for the foreseeable future. I mean, who knows, London might go into complete lockdown and I'll have no choice but to sit at my computer all day, and I'm planning on doing more videos more regularly on a variety of different topics. If you like what I do, please like and subscribe. You can also support me on Patreon and Subscribestar, and you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram as well. Thank you all once again, and I'll see you all next time. And a special thanks to Alex Meadows, Casey Adolphson, Dan Norman, Fenella Cooney, Green Potato Chips, Holly Mahone, James C. George, Janine Karen, Jess, Joe, Kim Vandry, Latin Creature, Alyssa Morris, Moy Felicita, Ricardo Jose, Steve Hendricks, Tennessee Barfly, The Poor of Rizzo, Traname Girl, Illiterati, Stephen Hassan, Laisha, James UK, and rest of my supporters on Patreon and Subscribestar.